Welcome to Bookish Podcast, episode 13. Why do the monsters hiding under a toddler's bed in a 1963 picture book look exactly like the apex predators that hunted early humans 30,000 years ago?
It's quite the question.
Right. So welcome to today's deep dive. I mean, if you just pull a classic children's picture book off your shelf right now, you generally expect to find like a padded room.
Yeah, a totally sanitized environment.
Exactly. You anticipate these gentle watercolor illustrations, a soothing moral, and just a landscape where the author points to a friendly bunny and basically assures you the world is soft and predictable.
And fundamentally safe, which, is by design. We engineer those books to act as shields.
Right.
Because the prevailing assumption in childhood literature for a very long time was that the nursery just must function as an impermeable fortress against the chaotic wilderness of the actual world.
Fortress, yeah.
The text is entirely meant to sedate.
But then, and this is the core of our deep dive today, when you open Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, that padded room just completely vanishes.
It is obliterated.
Totally obliterated.
Yeah.
You look closely at the heavy, cross-hatched ink on the page, and you are instantly dropped into an aesthetic landscape that is, well, entirely feral.
Yeah, it's jarring if you really look at it.
It is. And we're looking at a profound evolutionary mystery hiding in plain sight within the modern nursery here. So today, we are taking you on an extensive journey to dissect the feral anatomy of Max's monsters.
Which is such a fascinating lineage to trace.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to trace a continuous lineage from the soot-stained walls of Pleistocene caves right up to the digital screens of 2026.
And it is so critical to understand that we are not just analyzing a bedtime story here.
No, not at all.
By mapping what the source material identifies as the predatory geometry of Sendak's creatures.
The terrible claws and terrible teeth.
Right, exactly. Those terrible claws. We uncover an ancient psychological blueprint for survival. I mean, this deep dive is about understanding how humanity actively weaponizes beastly imagery to domesticate primal fear.
Weaponizes it. I love that phrasing.
Because we take the apex predator, the literal creature that used to hunt us in the dark, and we transform it into a sophisticated psychological tool. And that tool grants children sovereignty over their own internal landscapes.
So this journey is going to fundamentally rewire how you, the listener, view the concept of a monster.
It really will.
We're tearing down the idea of the monster as just some nightmare hiding in the closet and reframing it as a vital piece of cognitive technology.
Yes, cognitive technology is the perfect way to put it.
And to understand how this technology works, we really have to start by analyzing the specific visual engineering of Sendak's creatures. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
When you look at the monsters in the book, I mean, these are creatures with massive bull-like horns, yellow unblinking eyes, razor-sharp talons. There is a highly calculated juxtaposition happening.
A very deliberate one.
Right. The text explicitly focuses on the lethal geometry. It says the terrible claws, terrible teeth, terrible eyes.
But
Visually, those lethal elements are seamlessly grafted onto bodies that possess a soft, heavy, almost maternal roundness.
Yeah, and that visual juxtaposition you're describing is just the absolute masterstroke of the work.
It's so weird when you think about it. It's like designing a teddy bear with actual shark teeth. Why does combining this lethal geometry with maternal softness work rather than just completely traumatizing the child?
Well, it comes down to evolutionary biology. The human brain, over millions of years of evolutionary pressure, has developed this incredibly sensitive threat detection system.
Okay.
So when our visual cortex processes sharp angles, jagged lines, or converging points, shapes that in the natural world correlate directly to thorns, fangs, talons, and horns.
Things that can kill you.
Exactly. Things that piece the skin. That visual data actually bypasses the slower, logical prefrontal cortex.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it routes directly to the amygdala, which is our brain's fear center. This triggers an immediate, involuntary fight-or-flight response.
There's an automatic alarm bell.
Completely automatic. Heart rate spikes, cortisol floods the system, your pupils dilate. The geometry itself is interpreted as a biological threat before you even consciously know what you're looking at.
I think about it like taking the lethal, jagged silhouette of a prehistoric obsidian spearhead and wrapping it entirely in a thick layer of soft sheep's wool.
That is a great analogy.
Because if you just presented a child with a photorealistic, snarling dire wolf, the visual data would just overwhelm their nervous system.
Oh, totally. The fear would have no container. It would just be pure trauma.
Right. But Sendak embeds the jagged geometry of the predator, The curved beak, the sharp horns, into torsos that look like oversized plush toddlers.
Yes, they have human feet.
They have soft, sagging bellies, and their posture is strangely sluggish, almost tired.
And the rounded mass of those bodies acts as a vital neurological counterbalance.
How so?
Well, in mammalian biology, roundness is an incredibly potent signal. It communicates nourishment, warmth, and crucially, maternal safety.
Okay, that makes sense.
A rounded shape basically tells the brain's tactile processing centers, hey, this surface will not pierce your skin, this object is safe to touch.
So you get two conflicting signals at once.
Exactly. By fusing the terrifying geometry of the apex predator with the comforting mass of maternal roundness, the illustration effectively domesticates the primal fear. It constructs a secure, psychological container.
So the child gets to engage with the thrill of the threat. They get to look the terrible teeth right in the mouth. But their brain is simultaneously receiving background signals that they are anchored, held, and safe.
Yes, it's basically a microdose of primal terror delivered inside a visual hug.
A microdose of terror and a visual hug. I love that.
And that microdosing is what makes the fear manageable. The illustration transforms a paralyzing existential threat into an object of study.
An object of study, meaning the kid can just stare at it without panicking.
Precisely. When fear is contained this way, a child can interact with it, manipulate it, and ultimately begin to exert control over the physiological panic that those jagged visual cues would normally induce.
So if our visual cortex is so aggressively sensitive to those specific sharp shapes, we have to look at the environment that hammered that sensitivity into our DNA.
We do. We have to go way back.
Because if those jagged lines trigger an ancestral alarm system, which they clearly do, we need to ask, where exactly in human history was this alarm system first built?
To answer that, we have to retreat deep into the Paleolithic era.
Okay, set the scene for us.
We are talking specifically about the Pleistocene epoch, roughly 30,000 years ago. And to comprehend the psychological architecture of the monster, we first have to accept a very uncomfortable evolutionary truth.
Which is?
For the vast majority of human history, we were not the apex predators.
We were the prey.
We were a relatively slow, soft-skinned prey species, constantly stalked by cave lions, massive short-faced bears, saber-toothed cats, and dire wolves.
Our ancestors weren't observing these animals through the reinforced glass of a modern zoo.
No, not at all.
They were trying to sleep in absolute darkness, while animals that weighed 1,000 pounds and could see in the dark hunted them.
Yeah, it was just a constant, terrifying state of hypervigilance. The apex predator was the ultimate existential threat. I mean, it was a literal force of nature that could end your life in an instant.
But human neurology possesses a unique mechanism for processing that kind of overwhelming existential terror, right?
It does. We don't just run and hide. We mythologize the threat. We elevate the predator.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, if you examine the earliest undisputed masterworks of human creation, I'm talking about the cave paintings at Lascaux and Chauvet, you don't see sprawling landscapes.
Right.
You don't see portraits of humans gathering berries or sitting around. You see massive, astonishingly detailed kinetic murals of the beasts that hunted them. Lions, bears, charging bison.
And the execution of those paintings wasn't casual either. I mean, they were using charcoal, blowing ochre pigment through hollowed-out bones.
Yes, very deliberate artistry.
And they specifically utilized the natural bulges and curves of the cave walls to give three-dimensional mass to the muscles of the bears and lions.
It was incredibly sophisticated.
And when they lit those deep, oxygen-deprived caverns with just flickering animal fat lamps, the shifting shadows would have made the painted beasts look they were actually breathing and moving across the rock.
It was essentially an immersive installation.
An immersive installation 30,000 years ago.
Exactly. And the immersive nature of those caves served a very specific psychological function. This leads to the emergence of what anthropologists call the beast-man archetype.
The beast man. So mixing human and animal.
Right. Among these massive animal murals, we occasionally find depictions of therianthropes.
Therianthropes.
Yeah, human figures with the heads of lions or the antlers of stags, like the famous sorcerer of Trois Frères.
Okay, and what does that tell us?
It indicates a profound psychological adaptation. Early humans realized that to survive as a prey species, just panic and flight were insufficient. They had to learn how to mentally occupy the psychological space of the hunter.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Are you saying they were trying to, download the predator's operating system into their own minds?
That is exactly what they were doing.
Because if you are constantly hunted, the only way to anticipate the hunter is to adopt its aggression, its territorial dominance, and its singular focus.
Yes, you have to think like the thing that wants to eat you. And the deep cave, illuminated by a single flickering flame, was essentially the interface where they practiced this psychological transformation.
So it was a simulation.
The cave functioned as a survival simulation. By drawing the beast, studying its anatomy in the dark, and performing rituals where they literally draped the heavy hide of a wolf or bear over their own shoulders.
Oh, okay.
Our ancestors were rehearsing courage. They were temporarily shedding their vulnerability and stepping into the sovereign power of the apex predator.
And are you saying the modern nursery is essentially acting like a prehistoric cave? And the picture book is functioning like a cave painting used for survival simulation?
The architectural parallels are absolutely undeniable.
I mean, think about a child's bedroom at night. It is structurally identical to that Paleolithic cave.
It really is if you look at the sensory environment.
Right. It's isolated from the noisy, chaotic adult world of the rest of the house.
Right.
It's dark, shadows are stretching across the walls. There is a single flickering nightlight in the corner, acting as the fire.
The animal fat lamp.
Exactly. And sitting in the center of that space is a child holding a book filled with heavy ink drawings of the terrifying things that live out in the wild.
And you see, the physical threat of the Pleistocene bear or cave lion has been entirely removed from the modern suburb. There's no actual bear outside.
Thankfully.
But the psychological machinery, the deep-seated biological need to process fear and rehearse courage, remains perfectly intact in the human brain.
It's just sitting there waiting for input.
Right. So the modern picture book shrinks the ancient, towering threat of the Pleistocene predator down to an 8 by 10-inch piece of paper. It repurposes the apex predator,
Turning it from a literal threat into a vital psychological sparring partner for a child's developing imagination.
Yes, a sparring partner. It's as if we have this massive, complex engine in our brains specifically engineered over millennia to process the terror of being hunted.
And in a safe, modern environment, that engine just sits idle.
And an idle fear engine generates chronic, unspecific anxiety. It just spins.
So the feral picture book gives that ancient machinery something specific to chew on.
Exactly. It feeds the alarm system just enough controlled data to keep it properly calibrated without completely overwhelming it. A developing mind absolutely requires the monster.
Without the painted beast on the cave wall or the heavily inked creature on the page, the child lacks a focal point for their own internal development.
They need the resistance of the monster to build their psychological muscles, just like you need gravity to build physical muscle.
So if the modern nursery is acting as the prehistoric cave, and the picture book is the simulation running on the wall, then the person creating that book holds immense psychological power over the child's development.
Oh, absolute power. They are the architect of the simulation.
And that brings us directly to Maurice Sendak, because before he published this work in 1963, the prevailing cultural authorities were using that power to completely sedate children.
Yes, the landscape of mid-20th century children's literature was just aggressively sterilized.
I mean, we're talking about a very specific post-war vibe here.
Right. To understand Sendak's revolution, we really have to look at the societal context following World War II. The adult world had just survived immense, catastrophic global trauma.
Unimaginable trauma.
So in response to that, there was this desperate cultural push to manufacture safety, predictability, and control.
Which manifested in pristine suburban developments, white picket fences.
Exactly. And consequently, a philosophy of childhood that viewed kids as incredibly fragile porcelain dolls who needed to be shielded from any concept of darkness, ambiguity, or intense emotion.
This was the era of the classic Dick and Jane readers.
Yeah.
You know, see the dog run, see the cat jump.
Yes.
The sun's always shining, the fences are perfectly white, the parents never yell, and the children never experience a single complex emotion.
It was a bizarre, flat world.
And if a monster appeared in a story during this era, it was either a complete buffoon meant to be laughed at, or a purely external, one-dimensional villain that a shiny, morally flawless hero quickly vanquished.
Right. There was no nuance. And Sendak viewed that entire sanitized landscape as a fundamental lie.
A dangerous lie, really.
Because he grew up in Brooklyn, the child of Polish Jewish immigrants, many of whose relatives perished in the Holocaust.
Right.
He intimately understood that the world was not a safe, predictable suburb.
He knew the monsters were real.
He did. And furthermore, he recognized that children are not perfectly rational, emotionally stable miniature adults.
Oh, definitely not. Anyone who has spent 5 minutes with a toddler knows that.
Right. They are highly volatile, messy, and driven by immense, often dark internal forces. They experience profound rage, deep jealousy, paralyzing terror, and just a constant burning frustration at their own lack of agency.
So Sendak decided to bring the fire back into the cave.
He completely bypassed the gatekeepers of the sanitized 1950s nursery.
You know, the librarians and child psychologists who initially called his work too frightening.
Yeah, they were terrified of it. But he replaced their passive fairy tales with active, predatory confrontation. He knew children needed a place to put their rage.
And the absolute zenith of that confrontation in the book is the wild rumpus.
The wild rumpus, it is iconic.
For those who might not remember, this is the famous sequence where the text entirely vanishes for 3 consecutive double-page spreads.
There are absolutely no words to mediate the experience.
It is pure visual chaos. Max and the monsters howling at the moon, swinging wildly from the trees and marching in a feral parade.
And this sequence is not just a narrative climax, you know. It is a meticulously constructed, ritualized form of chaos.
Let's look closely at the rumpus. Max isn't running away from the terrible claws. He is at the absolute front of the line.
He is leading them.
He is orchestrating the howling. He is the one giving the orders.
Because Sendak is intuitively tapping into that exact Paleolithic survival mechanism we just discussed. During the rumpus, Max is actively rehearsing dominance.
Which is such a critical function for child development.
It's essential. Think about it. A child exists in an adult world that is highly structured and entirely non-negotiable.
Yeah, adults dictate the arbitrary rules, the rigid schedules, and the physical boundaries.
Sit here, eat this, go to sleep now.
So the wild rumpus provides a sanctioned, contained space for absolute chaos. It allows the child to safely rehearse the dominance, the aggression, and the control that they will eventually need to navigate and survive the real structured adult world.
So what does this all mean? The wild rumpus is basically an emotional flight simulator.
A flight simulator, yes.
You get to step into the cockpit, push the throttle to maximum, and deliberately crash the plane safely in your bedroom.
Without actually hurting anyone.
Right. You get to feel the intense G-force of severe emotional turbulence, the rage, the wildness, the howling, and learn how to pull the nose up before you ever have to fly the plane in the real world. Because you can't learn how to regulate your emotions if you've never been allowed to fully experience them. The flight simulator analogy perfectly captures the mechanism. And, you know, a simulator is only effective if the controls feel genuinely responsive and the threat feels plausible enough to trigger a real physiological reaction.
Which goes back to the art style.
Exactly. This is precisely why Sendak had to use predatory geometry. If the monsters looked entirely benign, if they were just literal plush toys, the simulator wouldn't function.
The child's brain wouldn't register any stakes.
Right. They wouldn't be practicing actual courage. They would just be passively consuming entertainment.
This marks a massive shift in how we understand the function of the beast. It moves the monster from being an external boogeyman that lives in the closet and wants to eat you to an internal psychological avatar.
The monsters on the page are a mirror.
Yeah. When Max's mother calls him a wild thing and sends him to bed without his supper, Max is vibrating with fury.
He is furious.
So the terrible teeth and the yellow eyes of the monsters he encounters aren't foreign threats. They are the physical manifestation of his own unexpressed adolescent rage.
Exactly. When he stares into all their yellow eyes without blinking once to tame them, he's literally staring down his own emotional volatility.
He is taming his own mind.
He is. But to successfully execute that taming, to take control of this emotional flight simulator, the child requires specific equipment.
Right, because how does a small, physically weak, entirely dependent child manage to dominate a jungle full of apex predators?
That brings us to the mechanics of childhood disenfranchisement.
Let's talk about that. We tend to romanticize childhood as this carefree time, you know.
Oh, we heavily romanticize it.
But when you look at the daily reality, it's a state of near total oppression.
It really is. Children are physically small, so the geography of the world is intimidating. Doorknobs are too high, chairs are too big.
And they have absolutely no economic or political power.
None. Every single hour of their existence is dictated by towering, powerful adults who arbitrarily decide when they eat, what they wear, when they speak, and when they sleep.
The lack of autonomy is staggering when you actually lay it out like that.
It's massive. And the childhood tantrum, which is the inciting incident of Sendak's book, right, Max throwing a fit, is fundamentally a rebellion against that powerlessness.
It is an explosion of frustration from a nervous system that has no agency.
Yes. And to survive this profound disenfranchisement without psychologically collapsing, children naturally develop defense mechanisms to reclaim a sense of power. The sources identify this specific tool as the internal apex predator.
The internal apex predator.
The child imagines themselves at the absolute top of the food chain in a fantasy environment to violently counterbalance their position at the very bottom of the power dynamic in reality.
And the primary tool Max uses to access this internal apex predator, to switch from powerless prey to dominant sovereign, is his outfit.
The wolf suit.
The iconic white wolf suit with the whiskers, the ears, and the bushy tail.
That wolf suit is arguably the most important element of the text. It is not a pair of pajamas.
No.
It is a ritual garment. We must connect this directly back to the Pleistocene shaman standing in the flickering light of the cave.
Okay, draw that line for me.
When a Paleolithic hunter draped the heavy, blood-scented hide of a wolf over their shoulders, they were not doing it for insulation against the cold.
It wasn't just a jacket.
No, they were enacting a profound psychological transformation. They were systematically taking on the spirit, the lethal ferocity, and the unquestioned sovereignty of the beast.
They were visually broadcasting to the universe and to their own nervous system, I am no longer prey, I am the danger.
Exactly the same transformation occurs when Max buttons up his wolf suit. He sheds the identity of a vulnerable, powerless boy who is yelled at and confined to his room by his mother.
He puts on the skin.
The ritual garment allows him to transcend his physical and societal limitations. By wearing the skin of the predator, he declares himself the most wild thing of all and claims absolute dominion over the monsters, which is to say, dominion over his own fears.
Okay, I want to push back on this specific mechanism for a moment.
Sure, go for it.
I completely buy the idea of a ritual garment conferring psychological power, but why does it have to be a beast skin?
What do you mean?
Well, if the goal is simply for the child to feel powerful and reclaim sovereignty from the towering adults, why doesn't Max put on a knight's suit of shining armor? Or a king's crown? Or a military uniform? Why do we have to bypass human civilization entirely and literally become the monster to claim childhood sovereignty?
That distinction is so crucial, and it highlights the difference between external defense and internal expression.
Okay, yeah.
A knight's suit of armor protects you from external attacks. It is rigid, cold, defensive, and above all, it is entirely civilized. It represents the rules of chivalry.
Right.
A king's crown represents societal authority, laws, and hierarchy. But societal authority and rigid rules are the exact adult constructs that Max is violently rebelling against in the first place.
Oh, I see.
Putting on a crown would just be substituting one set of adult restrictions for another.
Yeah. Crown doesn't let you howl at the moon. A crown requires you to sit up straight on a throne. It's just more middle management.
Precisely. Armor hides what is inside, but the beast's skin expresses it.
That is a great distinction.
It ties into a much deeper cultural function of monstrous imagery. It provides a safe harbor for expressing deeply taboo primal impulses.
Right, because consider what modern civilization demands of a toddler.
It's a lot.
We ask them to suppress millions of years of mammalian instincts. We demand they sit perfectly still in chairs, use quiet inside voices, never hit, never bite, and completely bury their innate wildness.
We basically force 2-year-olds to behave like middle-aged accountants attending a very stuffy dinner party.
Yes, the amount of impulse control we demand from a brain whose prefrontal cortex hasn't even begun to fully develop is absurd.
It is incredibly stressful for their neurology. So the wolf suit acts as a psychological permission slip to bypass that stress.
A permission slip.
When Max wears the skin of the beast, he is granted temporary ritualized immunity from the suffocating rules of civilization. A human boy cannot chase the family dog with a fork. That is a violation of the rules, and he will be punished.
Right, obvious.
But a wolf can chase its prey. By becoming the monster, Max finds a socially acceptable safe harbor to fully express his rage, his wildness, and his defiance without permanently destroying his attachment to his mother or jeopardizing his secure place in the human world.
That completely flips the script. The armor is about suppressing your emotions to survive the attack, but the wolf suit is about finally letting your emotions out so you don't explode.
Exactly.
It's the only culturally acceptable vehicle for a child to announce, I am furiously angry, I am wild, and I am powerful.
And it really showcases the genius of how humanity weaponizes beastly imagery.
We took the image of the massive, terrifying thing that used to hunt us in the dark forests, and we reverse engineered it into a vital psychological release valve for our children.
And we weaponized it because it works flawlessly with our biology, which is why this specific aesthetic blueprint has never gone obsolete.
That sets up our final area of exploration perfectly, because it's easy to see how this predatory geometry brilliantly empowered kids in 1963.
Yeah.
And we know it worked for kids in the 1990s and the early 2000s. But you are listening to this in 2026. You exist in an era saturated with artificial intelligence, hyper-realistic virtual reality, and instant algorithmic gratification.
A totally different technological landscape.
So we have to examine how this ancient Paleolithic blueprint holds up today. Does a child, or even an adult in 2026, still require the jagged teeth of a Pleistocene monster to process their complex modern feelings?
The unequivocal answer from the sources is yes.
Yes.
Absolutely, yes. The technological delivery mechanism has evolved dramatically, but the neurological blueprint hasn't changed a fraction of an inch.
Okay, walk me through how that works in a modern context, because you'd assume with the ability to procedurally generate any threat imaginable in VR, we would have invented an entirely new visual language for fear.
You'd think so. But we haven't invented a new language because human neurology hasn't fundamentally changed in 30,000 years. The visual triggers that bypass the logical brain and slam into the amygdala, the converging lines, the terrible eyes, the terrible claws, those are permanently hard-coded into our DNA.
So the modern tech still has to speak that ancient language.
Modern digital media designers and VR architects understand this biological reality perfectly. When they construct immersive digital environments intended to help children or adults process modern anxieties, they still deploy those exact feral mechanisms.
So even if the underlying anxiety a game is trying to process is something highly abstract and modern-like, the terror of climate collapse or the suffocation of algorithmic data overload or global economic instability.
Right, invisible threats.
The avatar the designers used to represent that complex threat still possesses the silhouette of a prehistoric beast.
It has to. If a VR designer creates an antagonist made of smooth, rounded geometric blocks, the player's brain simply will not register a physiological threat no matter how many hit points the antagonist has.
It just doesn't compute as danger.
Right. The monsters in a 2026 interactive VR experience might be constructed of polygons, procedural code, and haptic feedback, rather than charcoal or cross-hatched ink, but they are meticulously designed using the exact same predatory geometry.
That's wild.
The monster is an enduring cultural necessity because it is the only visual vocabulary our deep subconscious truly respects.
It acts as a permanent mirror. And when we look into that mirror, whether it's on a cave wall or a retinal display, what it reflects back to us is the entirety of our own evolutionary journey.
It reflects the journey from being terrified prey, huddled in the dark, hoping not to be eaten, to becoming the absolute masters of our own physical and mental landscapes.
We didn't survive the Pleistocene epoch by ignoring the beasts.
No, or by pretending they weren't terrifying. We survived by obsessively studying their geometry, drawing them on the walls, and actively integrating their power into our own psychology.
It's staggering to consider the backwards compatibility of this ancient code.
Backwards compatible is exactly the phrase.
I mean, you can look at a charcoal drawing smeared onto a rock face in France 30 millennia ago, or a 1963 ink illustration printed on paper, or you can strap into a highly immersive 2026 haptic VR experience, and that specific arrangement of sharp lines and forward-facing eyes works perfectly on your brain every single time.
Every single time. And this unbroken lineage leads us to the ultimate profound realization drawn from the source material. We never actually outgrow the wild things.
Now that seems counterintuitive to the whole concept of a children's book.
How so?
Well, the standard narrative arc is that the child misbehaves, encounters a fantasy world, learns a moral lesson, and then puts away childish things to grow up. At the end of the book, Max literally takes off his wolf suit, leaves the monsters behind, and comes back to his room to eat a supper that is still hot. He returns to civilization.
He returns to civilization, yes, but he returns irrevocably changed.
Okay, explain that.
The objective of the wild Rumpus, the goal of engaging with the feral anatomy of the monster in the flight simulator, is not to defeat the monster and leave its corpse rotting in the jungle.
It's not about slaying the dragon.
No, the goal is integration. As we mature from toddlers into adults, we don't discard the wild things. We take the emotional resilience, the rehearsed dominance, and the permission to be wild that we cultivated in the nursery, and we integrate it into a highly sophisticated toolkit.
The adults who are most capable of navigating the chaos, the unfairness, and the stress of the real world are often the ones who maintain a direct line to their internal apex predator.
Absolutely.
They know how to firmly say no in a boardroom. They know how to set an absolute boundary in a relationship. They know how to harness their own aggression and channel it into productive drive.
They haven't killed the beast. They've learned how to ride it.
They have successfully domesticated their own primal fear, transforming it from a source of panic into a source of personal power.
Which is the entire point of the exercise.
So to bring this massive journey together for you, the listener, let's trace the path we just walked. We started by opening a classic 1963 picture book, expecting a sanitized, padded room, and instead, we uncovered a profound evolutionary mystery.
We really broke down the visual engineering of the monsters.
Yeah, how fusing the soft mass of maternal roundness with the lethal predatory geometry of terrible teeth and claws creates a secure psychological container. It domesticates our ancestral fight-or-flight response, allowing us to interact with terror safely.
We then followed that visual trigger back 30,000 years to the Pleistocene era. We examined how early humans, living as vulnerable prey, utilized the isolation of the deep cave and the beastman archetype to mentally occupy the space of the hunter.
They used imagery to transform their psychology from prey into apex predator.
Exactly.
And we saw how Maurice Sendak radically repurposed that prehistoric cave, turning it into the modern feral nursery. By rejecting the sterile, passive fairy tales of the post-war era and introducing active, ritualized chaos through the wild Rumpus, he provided children with an essential emotional flight simulator to rehearse dominance and process their own complex rage.
Which brought us to the brilliant mechanism of the wolf suit.
The ritual garment.
We explored how this provides a crucial safe harbor for taboo impulses. It allows a physically powerless, heavily restricted child to weaponize beastly imagery, temporarily shed the suffocating rules of civilization, and claim absolute sovereignty over their own internal emotional world.
Finally, we realized that this ancient blueprint hasn't gone anywhere. From charcoal smeared on a rock, to cross-hatched ink on paper, to the procedurally generated digital nightmares of 2026, we continually rely on this predatory geometry to process our overwhelming global anxieties.
It proves that we never actually outgrow the wild things.
We simply upgrade the hardware running the simulation.
Which leaves us with a critical and perhaps slightly uncomfortable final thought to consider.
What's that?
If the source material is correct, and we never truly outgrow these wild things, but instead must integrate them for our own emotional survival, perhaps the modern adult's greatest psychological vulnerability isn't being too wild or too angry.
Okay, what is it then?
Perhaps our greatest vulnerability is forgetting how to wear our own wolf suit when the chaotic, deeply unstructured rumpus of the adult world becomes too much to bear.
So the question to you is, where is your wolf suit today?